You are watching Xirtus.
First of all, let's explain the context. So Alberto Rivera, for those viewers who are, maybe ignorant about who this guy was and say, who the heck is Alberto Rivera? Okay, let me explain first of all who is Alberto Rivera. Alberto Rivera is a guy who suddenly came out stating he had a past as a Jesuit, and actually there is some documents and there is some photos that prove that he seemingly proved that he was. However, he had these stories that he relayed to this comic strip guy who created a series of comic strips based on his stories.
Chick Track, Jack Chick, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what happened is that one of these stories was called The Prophet, and it was based on Muhammad. And what happens here is that the alleged Father Alberto, and I'm saying alleged Father Alberto Rivera because we always have to be very careful. The Vatican denied that he was ever made a priest and let alone a Jesuit. However, like I said, there is documents that prove the contrary. But it's not this that interests me in my story because, of course, here is mainly what happens when he went to this cardinal, this Jesuit cardinal,
right?
Cardinal Bea, a very important figure in the Jesuit world, who was also central figure for the Second Vatican Council, that, as you know, changed the history of the Catholic Church as we know it.
And helped excommunicate Lafebre, right?
No, but also led to this Pope that we have today and led to this progressive church that we have, unfortunately, today. This Catholic Church that has...
he created Vatican II, but then he also, Lafebre, created the Society of St. Pius the 10th, right? Or 13th? Well, yeah, of course. And then Barrere had him excommunicated, right?
Well, yeah, initially, but then they tried to bring them back, especially Ratzinger, who was more of a conservative. They tried
you gotta control him
without losing track of where we are. Otherwise, it kind of branches out too much. What happens is that Alberto Rivera talks about Cardinal Bea. Now, Cardinal Bea apparently told him a story. The story is the origins of Islam, and the story about the origins of Islam apparently involves the Vatican,
which is kind of believable, right? Like that's like a pretty believable, like the Vatican getting involved with things.
It's believable if you don't know the story of the Middle East, but it is unbelievable. However, there is certain elements in the story of Cardinal Bea, alleged story of Cardinal Bea, because it's Alberto Rivera who reports this story. Now, let's remember also another thing. The Cardinal Bea's secretary was Father Malachi Martin during the Second Vatican Council. And Father Malachi Martin never really came out in the open and said anything bad about Alberto Rivera, to my knowledge. So this makes it even more believable that actually Alberto Rivera had been a Jesuit and is possibly...
Or maybe a student, maybe he was almost there, right? Yeah.
No, there is photos of him actually already a Jesuit.
Okay.
So and there is a document that seems to prove that. However, we don't know. We can't say that with certainty, and I always base my facts on certainty. But one thing is interesting, that it takes the story that Cardinal Bea about the origins, the Vatican origins, is based on the fact that Muhammad, who was a merchant living in Mecca, and this is a real part of, this is proven by the hadiths. He married Khadija. Khadija was a rich widower in Mecca. It was a pagan town, though, with 360 idols. Khadija was part of this Kaddish tribe that will become an enemy of Muhammad after he establishes himself with the Quran. The Quran, though, took decades to it wasn't just a channeling that a few days, like Aleister Crowley, 3 days and he has the book of the law out. It took a bit of time, but he had married this rich woman, I think when she was 40, so he had all the time of the world to dedicate himself to go out of Mecca in this cave and allegedly channel and talk with this angel Gabriel, and receive this Quran. Now, there is though another element, which is also reported in the hadiths, that the Muslims tend to not want to talk about. And it is the fact that Khadija introduced Muhammad to her cousin, who was a Christian. Now, Alberto Rivera's account says that he was a Vatican agent somehow, but the facts are different because in reality the cousin was an Ebionite priest. Now, an Ebionite is a Jewish sect, is a Christian Jewish sect that doesn't believe in the divinity of Jesus. And so this also will explain why the Quran itself doesn't portray Jesus as a divine being, but just as a man, a prophet.
That does make total sense, yeah, because he's like their rabbi, the Ebionite rabbi, exactly.
So here we have an element of the story that allegedly was given by Cardinal Bea that doesn't somehow fit in this context. Let's remember that the whole region was mostly in the hands of, there was pagans, but there was also Christians, and they were Oriental Christian, meaning that they were the basis of what would later become the Orthodox Church. I mean, they were the Oriental churches that never really got along with the Rome in the first place.
Manichaeans and all that. Yeah.
To imagine this guy who was called Barak ibn Nafal, to imagine him being an agent of the Vatican is a little bit too far-fetched. Okay? However, the account of Cardinal Bea includes also other elements, including the elements of pre-Islamic goddesses that were discovered in Palestine, now Israel. There is some interesting elements in this, that also make us understand that either Alberto Rivera was an expert on Islam, because only people who have studied Islam for a number of years can know certain things, or otherwise this account might have had some veracity, might have been real. However, on the contrary of what my friend Eric Phelps, he took this account as being completely true and the Vatican behind Islam. I wanted to be a little bit more critical and more honest about it, because this book has in fact reached #1 in Islamic social studies, in the history of Islam, and in other charts on Amazon, and nobody has debunked it, and has positive reviews even by the Sufis, who I've criticized in this book, because this book is based on facts. It's about not criticizing or speculating or making conspiracies. It's about facts.
Right. Well, okay, that's really good information. I like that. So the idea of the Ebionites.
If Rivera said something true, I take what is true, but what is not true, I criticize, and I'm sure that people.
There's an avenue there with the Ebionites, because the Ebionites are the idea that Catholicism is the monolithic Christian church, or the Christian belief structure that's happening, isn't correct. But the other question then, to further it, is the Deuteronomists. You were talking about the 360 idols, kind of pantheon of Canaanite religion. What about the Yahweh, Allah as this monolithic? Okay.
Now, an Ebionite priest gave Muhammad a monotheistic structure. Okay, and of course, being an Ebionite means being a Jew. Not a Jew, but a believer in a sect that was basically made of Jews that followed the Jewish belief but had embraced Jesus, even if they didn't embrace the divinity of Jesus, means that somehow he had embraced the Abrahamic faith that preceded him, okay, including elements of Christianity that we see then reported in the Quran. One thing that is actually interesting about all this is that once this deliverance of this Quran comes through, the Khadija, the wife, says, and this is reported in the hadiths, the hadiths are those teachings which are not in the Quran, but they are reported as official by the by Islamic law. They are certified as being genuine. So the story of Muhammad being so vast, it couldn't be included only in the Quran, so they had these hadiths. And in the hadiths, at one point, Muhammad says, well, this guy, he has a couple of gardens in heaven. You have to respect him. This is a guy that you have to respect, even if he was a Christian. So he puts, and this is something that the Muslims never really talk about, this connection with Christianity. Even if it's not traditional Christianity, there is a connection with Christianity. The connection with the Vatican, though, comes later on, when the Vatican starts to see this religion expanding. Now, people here in the chat notice might have some misconceptions about me. I'm no longer an active Mason, and I've always been very open about my associations. As you know, I've written books about them. I was actually, one of my mentors in London was Julian Smith, who was the head of the Shriners in Europe. And the Shriners themselves were inspired by a guy who had been initiated into the Druze in Lebanon. So he actually had an important experience in the Middle East and then brought back this tradition. Now, for those who don't know the Shriners are not accepted as Muslims by the Islamic world. In fact, they have been kicked out of Mecca, because when you go and study the Shriners' rituals, you understand, yes, they embrace certain elements of Islam, but in reality, they still retain their Christian. It's a little bit like the Templars, who converted in secret but still retain elements of Christianity, of course, because they were a knighthood that represented Christianity.
Xirtus makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch Xirtus for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to Xirtus, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about Xirtus. Your friends will come to like Xirtus, much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to Xirtus. See, that was easy. Xirtus.